There are so many variables in gardening. It's really hard if something to find out if something really works without serious research and without scientific methods. So today, I'm going to debunk some of those myths. And I think many of you will be surprised at some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today. At the end of this presentation, I will have a list of resources where all of this information came from. So let's get started. You know that the wonderful thing about gardeners is that they love sharing information and that they are happy to pass down tips and tricks. But there's just one problem. Many of them are wrong. Now, I'm starting off with a myth that well, it's probably going to surprise a lot of you. And that is coffee grounds are acidic and can be used to lower the pH. Now, how many of us thought that, huh? Well, the reality is that after the grounds are brewed, the pH is actually closer to neutral, somewhere between 6.5 and 6.8. Now, the best idea if you want to use your coffee grounds is to put them in the compost pile, but you don't want to exceed about 20% coffee grounds by volume. Now, you'll kind of have to figure that out. Now, you can use them directly in as the soil as a soil amendment, but you do need to know that excess coffee grounds, if they are applied to the soil before they're composted, they might have multiple effects on the soil system. One thing is the microorganisms might tie up the nitrogen temporarily, and also be aware that the caffeine residues from the coffee grounds, they can actually suppress germination and slow down the growth of some plants. So if you're going to add them directly to the soil, really be careful about how much you add and at one time. So it's best just to put them in your compost pile. Now, I've heard this myth a lot. Watering on hot, sunny days will burn the plants because the water droplets magnify the sun's rays. Well, the reality is wet foliage is not susceptible to sunburn. It rains during the summer all around the world, and the plants are just fine. Now, if your plants are showing signs of water stress in the middle of the day, go ahead and water them. It's okay. Now, of course, we all know that watering early in the day is best, and watering from the base will save water and also prevent the spread of diseases. But if you are out there monitoring your plants frequently, you're going to soon learn how much water they're going to need to keep them healthy. So walk around your garden, look at those plants, and if they need some in the middle of the day, it's okay. You can water them. Now, for a long time now, this is what we were told to do. When you plant a tree or shrub, add amendments to the soil. We were told that a lot growing up, weren't we? But research has shown that when adding an amendment to the planting hole, the roots actually may stay within that amended soil and not grow out into the native soil. So that means that if the roots can't stretch out and grow into our native soil, then that means the roots are probably going to start circling around the hole, and the tree or the shrub will either be girdled or it'll die because it's going to outgrow the roots itself. Now, if you have really poor soil that needs amending, you can amend it, but amend a large area, not just the little planting hole, a large area around it so that when those roots grow, they will be able to be big enough to grow out into our native soil. Now, here is one that's hard for many people to grasp. Excuse me. And the myth is a layer of gravel or coarse material in the bottom of a container improves drainage. Now, that sounds like it would make sense, but actually, the opposite happens. The reality is that the gravel will actually hinder the movement of water in a container and lessen the area for root growth. You see, scientists have demonstrated that water does not move easily from layers of fine textured materials to layers of coarse materials. Now, if you look at the photos, you can see what I mean. The container on the right has gravel in the bottom. Excuse me. The container on the right has gravel. It's the container on the left, I guess. Sorry about that. Has water in the bottom, and that's being held between the potting soil and the gravel. That's right in the first place. Excuse me. That means I'm really screwing this up. Maybe I better start over. All right, you can look at those pictures. Look at the one on the right, and you see the gravel in the bottom, and you see the potting soil on the top. Well, look where that water is. It's in the middle of that container. That means you're going to have less room for the roots to grow inside of that container. Now look at the one on the left, and you will notice there's no gravel on the bottom. Yes, there's still some water in there, but that water is at the very bottom of that container. Unless the soil dries out completely, there's always going to be a little bit of water in the bottom. But look how much more space there is for having roots to grow in that container. So just remember, when there are two different textured materials, they come together, they're called an interface, and that's what's keeping the water from moving from one to the other. I hope that finally made sense to you. All right, shall we move on to the next one? Here's a myth. Epsom salt will prevent blossom end rot in tomatoes. Now, you probably hear this a lot, and I'm sure many of us have tried this. But reality is that blossom end rot is caused by a calcium deficiency, and Epsom salts contains magnesium and no calcium. Now, most of our soils actually contain enough calcium already, but the only way for plants to take up calcium is through water. So actually, inconsistent watering is the main cause of blossom end rot, not a calcium deficiency, and definitely not a magnesium deficiency. And did you know that if you adding Epsom salt to the soil, if our soil already has sufficient magnesium, it can actually prevent the calcium uptake. So we don't want to overdo the magnesium. Now, did you also know that there are some tomatoes that are sold that are being resistant to blossom end rot, like Celebrity and Jet Star? Those are just a couple. So if you're having a lot of trouble with blossom end rot, you might want to try purchasing some of those tomatoes. And also be aware that the sauce or paste type tomatoes, they seem to be more prone to blossom end rot. So when it's time to plant your tomatoes, be sure that you use consistent watering, and that will help with that blossom end rot. All right, how about this myth? Ants help peonies bloom. I was told that when I was growing up, but actually a myth. The reality is that ants are attracted to this sugary nectar that the peonies secrete. So what happens when an ant is out there and he comes across a peony, he finds this yummy, yummy nectar and he sends out the pheromones and he alerts all the other ants, hey, look at this. We got some yummy food over here. Well, the ants all gather there, and you know what the ants actually do? They actually protect that peony from other insects that might be feeding on that peony because they aren't going to want anybody else to eat that yummy nectar. They want themselves. So they're going to be actually helping that peony, not helping it bloom, but helping keep it safe from other pests that might get in there. Now, the presence of the ants is only temporary, so don't worry about that. Once they're gone, that nectar's gone, the ants are going to go away too. If you do happen to pick a peony and it still has some ants inside of it, just shake them off or hold it underwater. And please, no need for pesticides. You don't have to worry about that. The ants are going to go away soon enough. Now, for safety reasons, everyone should learn about this myth. If a pesticide is organic or natural, it must be less toxic. No. Organic and synthetic pesticide toxicity is determined using the same standards. And did you realize that some organic pesticides actually have a higher toxicity than some of the synthetic pesticides? Now, all pesticides are labeled with signal words, and that is danger, warning, or caution. Danger is the most toxic, and caution is the least toxic. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Some of you may have heard, or maybe you've used the organic pesticide called rotenone, or maybe you have used, and I know lately they've been talking a lot about the organic herbicide containing 20 or 30% vinegar. Well, I want you to know that both of these organic pesticides have a signal word, danger, which is the most toxic. So Before using any pesticide, consider other options first, your cultural, your physical, or mechanical. And when you do use a chemical, always start with the least toxic. Remember, that's caution. That's the least toxic. And of course, read all the pesticide labels carefully before you use them. Now, here's another myth that's been around for a long time, and unfortunately, is still being told to the public. And that is covering a tree's pruning cut with pruning paint helps to protect the wound. The reality is that painting over the wounds actually creates an environment that is prone to rot. You see, trees have their built-in repair system, and that allows the wound to seal itself over time. Unfortunately, wound paint is still being sold in stores. Now, the best way to care for your trees is to use sharp, clean cutting tools and use proper pruning cuts. Those are the things that is going to help the tree repair its wound, not paint. All right, what about this myth? Just add more organic matter to the soil. Now, many of us have hard clay soil, so we're told just add more organic matter, just add more organic matter. But once again, research has debunked this myth. Now, this might be a little bit confusing to you. The reality is that adding too much organic matter can lead to problems. Okay, that is right. Now, adding organic matter can help improve the soil structure, and it does. And it does promote long-term plant health. But I will tell you that the ideal amount of organic matter in the soil is about 5 to 8% by weight. And I know some of you right now are thinking, okay, I am totally confused. Well, trust me, I'm totally confused too. So I had to talk to some of my peers and ask them how this all works. So we have come up with this, and that is that a good rule of thumb is to add about 1 inch of plant-based, get that, plant-based compost a year. That will keep your garden really, really healthy. Now, be very careful if you're using manure-based compost, like cow or especially chicken and turkey because they have really, really high phosphorus levels. And if you have too much organic matter that is from manure-based compost, you might be raising the phosphorus too much in your soil. Now, the best way to know how much organic matter you have in your soil and how much phosphorus you have in your soil is to have your soil tested. And we have analytical laboratories serving Oregon, and there is a link to that where you can send in your soil and they will test all that for you. So I hope you're not too confused about this. I've learned a lot today just listening and talking with my peers about adding too much organic matter. All right, did you know this one? Tree roots only go as far as the drip line. Well, the reality is that most trees extend a lot farther than the drip line. In fact, magnolias can extend 3 to 7 times farther than the drip line. Red maples and poplars, 3 times farther. Locusts, 2.9, and ash, 1.7. So if you're planting under or around a tree, it's really important that you know that the roots go out a lot farther than the tree. So be very careful when you're digging around the tree in that area. The myth. You should top a tree to control its height. Sound logical? No. The reality is that trees are programmed to attain a certain height. And if you top that tree, the rapidly growing suckers will actually be weakly attached and they can become a hazard. Also, the tree will soon become the same height that it was before because, like I said, it's programmed to be that height. Now, Sherry Shung has done several webinars through our 10-Minute University website that you can watch to learn all the proper pruning techniques. You also have to realize that the trunks are not limbs and they cannot seal the wound. Like I mentioned in the previous slide when we were talking about wounding paint, when we were talking about painting them. So if you top a tree, not only are those limbs going to grow rapidly at the top, they're going to be weakly attached, and that's going to be an entrance for diseases. So be careful. Oh, you're going to love this one. You can deter moles with chewing gum, chocolate, human hair, mothballs, and drain cleaner. We've heard them all, haven't we? The reality is none of these remedies work, and some of them are harmful to the environment or pets and people. So please don't try any of these home remedies. The mole's diet consists mainly of earthworms and some grubs. Now, technically, it is not legal to use an unregistered material as a rodenticide, no matter how benign it is. Now, there are molicides registered for use with moles, but their control is really, really limited. So, carefully set out traps actually work the best. So, don't use any of those home remedies. Save that chocolate for somebody special. Don't try to give it to the moles. How about this one? Dish soap repels aphids. Well, yes, we've heard that one many times. And I will even have to confess that before I took the Master Gardener course, I even tried this. And yikes, not good results. Because the reality is, as tempting as these DIY recipes can be, homemade pesticides are dangerous. Very few of these recipes come from research-based sources. And did you know that dish soaps are not actually true soaps? They're detergents, and they're synthetically produced and chemically designed to be powerful cleaners. And as because they're degreasers, they can also destroy the plant's leaf cuticle. Now, the cuticle of a plant is this protective layer covering the leaves and the fruit and the flowers and the non-woody stems. And that cuticle helps protect the plants. But if you use a degreaser, you're going to destroy that cuticle, and then the plant can't help itself. Now, even if you're using insecticidal soap, which is labeled for garden use, it can injure the plants if it's not used correctly. So be careful how you use any type of pesticide, even if it's organic and even if it says it's very safe. Now, here's a myth that has received a lot of publicity, and the idea of using organic herbicide appeals to many of us. But the myth is that corn gluten meal is an effective organic herbicide. Now, the key word here is effective. But the reality is that corn gluten meal is not a selective product, nor is it effective on all weed types. You see, corn gluten meal, or CGM, is the protein byproduct of corn milling, and it's high in nitrogen, about 10% nitrogen. Now, some of the research has shown that it may be slightly effective in the Midwest United States, but it's not as effective in other climates, such as those in the Western US, where I'm at right now. There are no specific data from the field trials in the Western US that supports the use of corn gluten meal in weed control. The nitrogen in the corn gluten meal benefits the desirable plants, and it also can benefit the existing plants. Now, the weed problems will increase if the weeds are not removed before the application because corn gluten meal is a pre-emergent. And some of the studies even say that it only slows down the germination of the weeds. So if this is something that you really want to use, I really recommend that you read all the research first. Then you can decide if this is going to work in your in your situation, if it's going to work. Also, you need to know that the cost of corn gluten meal is very high compared to other weed control strategies. Oh, you're going to love this one. Green potatoes are deathly poisonous, right? We heard that a lot. Well, I'm going to tell you why we hear a lot about green potatoes being a deathly poison. It has to do with a legend. It has to do with the legend of Sir Walter Raleigh. You see, Sir Walter Raleigh, in an effect to promote potatoes, he gave plants to the royal gardeners in the court of Queen Elizabeth I. Well, her cooks threw away the tubers, but they were good English cooks. So what they did, they boiled up the potato greens for a big feast to celebrate this new crop. Well, that in turn made everyone in the royal court very sick. That is how the legend began that eating a green potato is poisonous, when in reality, they didn't eat the potato, did they? No, they ate the greens. So the reality is, it would take up to 5 pounds of green potatoes to make you sick. Now, potatoes are in the nightshade family, and that does include some toxic members. The nightshade plants contain a toxin called solanine, and it is found in the green parts of the nightshade plants and in the tubers. If your tubers are exposed to light, they turn green. So, FDA recommends that you just peel the skins and any shoots that have green color on your potato, peel those off, and they are perfectly fine to eat. So you don't have to throw away that green potato. Just peel it. Peel that green part off. How about this? Grass clippings cause thatch. Are you saying, yeah, it does? No, it doesn't. You see, thatch is caused by the rhizomes that are the below ground lateral growth and the stolons that are the above ground lateral growth, not the thatch. Thatch is the part that we've cut off, right? Okay, now bentgrass and Kentucky bluegrass do produce a lot of rhizomes and stolons, so they are susceptible to a lot of thatch. If you have perennial rye and tall fescue, they don't produce much thatch because they don't have as many of the rhizomes and stolons growing. And actually, your grass clippings, if you add those grass clippings back onto your lawn when you're mowing, like the middle picture shows, it actually will add the nutrients back into the soil. So remember that thatch is not caused by mowing your lawn. How about this? Lime will remove moss from your lawn. This is a tricky one because the lime will raise the pH, but it will not remove the moss that's already there. Okay. Now, moss grows in excuse me, in nitrogen deficient soils and soils that have a low pH, and it also grows a lot in the shade. Now, adding lime is good for soils because it will help raise the pH of your soil, but it won't remove the moss that's already there. So, to help prevent the moss in your lawn, you want to keep your lawn as healthy as possible to try to outcompete the moss. Give it regular fertilizer applications containing nitrogen and more sunlight. Now, if all of that doesn't work for you, you need to use something specifically developed for moss removal. And if you're trying to grow grass in a very shady area, you might just want to think about removing the grass and planting things in there that grow pretty good in the shade. But you're going to have to get rid of that moss before you add the lime. What about this myth? Pine needles make soil more acidic. You would think so because you have them growing underneath pine trees, right? And pine trees do like an acidic soil, right? Well, the reality is that pine needles do not make the soil more acidic. You see, needles do have a pH of about 3.2 to 3.8 when they first drop from the tree. But once these needles are left on the ground, they are broken down naturally, and the microbes will actually neutralize these pine needles. So their pH is going to go higher. Now, pine needles do make a good mulch. Just be aware that they break down kind of slowly if you're going to add them to your compost pile. Now, this is a myth that's hard to get people to believe, and that is brown recluse and hobo spiders are common in Oregon and they cause necrotic bites. And actually, most bites that we get are from something other than spiders. Very few of people's bites are caused from spiders. Now, the reality is that brown recluses are not found in Oregon, no matter what the doctors or anyone else says. And hobo spiders do not cause necrotic bites. You see, brown recluse are established in about 16 states in the United States, but they're mostly in the South Central Midwest. And hobo spiders, we used to think that they caused necrotic bites, but the CDC removed them from the venomous spider list in 2015. So we don't have to worry about that anymore. Now, black widows are the only potentially harmful spider we have in Oregon. But like I said, spider bites are not very common. Drought-tolerant plants don't need watering. We're learning a lot more about climate change and how we should be putting in drought-tolerant plants. But if somebody tells you that a drought-tolerant plant doesn't need watering, you need to tell them, sorry, that is a myth. And if you believe this, then all of those drought-tolerant plants that you put in are probably going to die, because this is definitely a myth. Because even drought tolerant plants need water the first year or two. The first year, the plants are sending down roots, so they need water to help support those roots. And the second and third year, they will still need infrequent watering. Of course, mulching is going to help you to maintain the soil moisture and also help those healthy soil microbes that are in our soil. Now, planting drought tolerant plants is a great idea. A great idea. We should all think about that. But just remember to water those plants the first year or two. And the larger trees may need to be watered a little bit every summer. But I want to tell you, there's a couple exceptions. This is really interesting. And Western oak and ceanothus and Pacific madrone need little or no water. Now, I don't know how many of you grow those beautiful ceanothus bush like you see on this picture, but here's an interesting fact about ceanothus, and that is if you give them summer water, your ceanothus should last about 5 to 7 years. Okay? If you don't give it summer water, it should live up to about 35 years. And I can tell you this is true because I killed my ceanothus because I didn't realize that I wasn't supposed to water it. Okay, how about this one? Here's another tricky one. Adding sand to clay soils improves texture and drainage. That is a myth. The reality is sand and clay make cement, right? Now, no amount of sand added to clay soils is going to improve the texture. And problems are probably going to occur when the sand and the clay are mixed together. Now, when you mix a sandy and a clay soil together, this is what happens. The large pore spaces in the sandy soil are going to be filled in with the smaller clay particles. And the result makes it even a heavier, denser soil with less total pore space than either the sandy soil or the clay soil alone. So, and that can even make it more difficult to manage, of course, than your original clay soil. But the best way to improve both the clay and the sandy soil is with organic matter. And we did talk about that a lot, didn't we? You know what kind? Plant-based organic matter added to your clay soils. How about this myth? Newly planted trees require staking. Reality is if your tree has a sturdy root ball and it is stable in the planting hole, it does not need to be staked. If a tree is staked really, really tight and not allowed to move, it's going to become a weak tree. It needs movement, a little bit of movement to help develop a sturdier trunk and a sturdier root system. So staking may be needed if you are in a windy area or you're on a steep slope. And if you do need to stake, do stake it loosely because we want it to have that little bit of movement to make it stronger. And the stakes should only be put in for 1 year. Be sure you don't put them in longer. You can see what happened to that one tree that they forgot to take the stakes off. A handful of bone meal before planting trees or shrubs. Add it before planting trees or shrubs. You think that's a myth or do you think that's not a myth? Well, the reality is, unless your soil test shows a deficiency of phosphorus, don't add it. You see, bone meal is primarily calcium and phosphorus. Now, our non-agricultural soils, like most of us have, they have adequate calcium and adequate phosphorus. So you don't want to add more phosphorus. That is going to cause some problems. Bone meal is mostly non-soluble, so it's making it inaccessible to the plants quickly. It doesn't work quickly, is what I'm saying. And high levels of phosphorus from the bone meal can sometimes inhibit the growth of the mycorrhizal fungi. And the mycorrhizal fungi are a really important part of the soil system. So you don't have to worry. Don't add bone meal when you're planting trees or shrubs. Now, I have heard many arguments about this one. The myth, don't use pressure treated wood in raised beds. We've heard that, right? The reality is pressure treated lumber is an economical and long-lasting choice for constructing raised beds. But you want to use wood treated with copper azole for ground contact and residential use. That's what the pressure treated wood is going to say. That's the type you want to buy. Um, it has been over 12 years since the arsenic-containing wood preservative CCA was used for wood that was available to the general public. So make sure you don't use any salvage wood that's over 20 years old because you know it contains that CCA. Now, some people are concerned about the copper in the pressure-treated wood affecting their vegetables, but OSU research shows that there is no increase in the copper concentration in the vegetables and the herbs that were grown with the copper azole pressure treated wood. Now, I want to tell you that all the information here about using this pressure treated wood was from studies done in the Willamette Valley. Okay. If you live in other parts of the US, please look up the research from your area. It might be a little bit different than the research that was done in the Willamette Valley. But those of us in the Willamette Valley, pressure treated wood with copper azole is a safe way to use for raised beds. Oh, what about this myth? Bee houses promote and conserve bee diversity. Oh, it kind of makes sense. I do think that's a myth or not. Well, sorry, but it is not. That is a myth. Reality is most bee species nest in the ground. They don't nest in nest boxes. Some do. Yes, some bee species do nest in bee houses. But the bee houses that we have out there are mostly colonized by native wasps and not by native bees. And 70%, about 70% of our native bees nest in the ground in Oregon. Now, bee houses do good, but not as good as you might think. But if you are putting houses out there for your mason bees, they are good because they are good for pollination if you know the proper way to take care of your mason bees. What about this myth? Wilting leaves always indicate that a plant needs water. We see a plant wilting, we think, oh no, I need to water it. That's a myth. Now, yes, that is often the case, and you can check to see if your soil is dry. But the reality is there are other reasons that a plant's leaves could be wilting. For instance, waterlogged soil will be depriving the roots of oxygen, which can result in wilting. Keeping the soil too moist can promote the fungal diseases like verticillium or fusarium. I don't know how to spell it. I don't know how to say it. Sorry. And there's another culprit for wilting, and that is sometimes animals can damage the roots. Sometimes gophers or nematodes or other insects, they will feed directly onto the roots. And some animals, like a mole, may actually be creating tunnels that go right near your plant, and that will leave too much airspace in there. But the last possible cause of wilting could be for over-fertilizing or for excess salt. So if your leaves are wilting, you're going to need to figure out what the problem is, and then you'll know how to fix it. How about this? You should not or braid bulb leaves. Now, how many of us have done this? Yes, I have done this. Thank goodness it was a long time ago. The reality is that knotting or braiding actually restricts photosynthesis. Now, the foliage on spring bulbs must be left to die back naturally. If you knot them or braid them, the leaves, then the parts of the leaf that's not exposed to the sun, it's unable to transform the sun into that stored energy. And the stored energy is what's going to allow the bulbs to produce the leaves and the flowers for the next season. Now, the good news is you don't have to wait for the leaves to die and turn brown before removing them. You can remove the green leaves somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks after the flowers have died, because by that time, there has already been enough stored energy and nutrients for next year's flowers. So don't worry about having to braid those up. Don't worry about having to wait until they completely die. 3 to 6 weeks after your flowers die, you can cut down those daffodil and all the other bulb leaves. And I'll tell you, I did mine yesterday. How about this? Colder than normal winter will kill bugs. It seems like this should make sense, right? No, sorry. Cold weather does not kill the bugs. You see, insects are tough and they will take whatever Mother Nature gives to them. Insects are good at hiding out under bark and soil and logs or mulch. They do that to protect themselves. Some of the species even overwinter as larvae in the leaf litter, and that will help keep them warm. Some of the insects will burrow deep into the soil, and many of them just hibernate so that cold weather doesn't kill them. And this is really interesting that some species bloodstreams actually contain as much as 50% glycerol. So they are definitely not going to freeze. Lichens kill trees they grow on. Is this a myth? Yes, this is a myth. Lichens do not parasitize or kill trees that they grow on. That greenish gray frilly growth is composed of fungi and algae, and they grow together. They have a symbiotic relationship together. They benefit from their interaction with each other. Now, if you have a lot of lichens on your trees, you're probably living in an area with good air quality because lichens are very sensitive to air pollution because they can absorb the pollutants from the air. And that's when they won't live anymore. And having the lichens on the trees can also provide some shelter for beneficial insects. So if you don't mind the look, leave those lichens on the tree. And sometimes removing them can even harm the tree a little bit and allow diseases to enter. Oh, what about this one? A bleach solution is best for disinfecting tools. Now, I wonder how many of you out there are saying, yeah, I use bleach on my tools. Well, the reality is chlorine bleach is not recommended because it can cause pitting on the tools. To clean your tools, but still prevent them from pitting, you can use things like ethanol or isopropyl alcohol. You can even use Listerine or Lysol or Pine Sol. Now, the diseases that do invade the vascular system or on a tree or that form that oozing cankers, those are the ones that are more likely to contaminate your pruning tools. So be sure to keep your pruning tools in good condition and not rusted and not pitted. You don't need to use them on the bleach. You don't need to use the bleach on them. How about this myth? I think we're going to have fun with this one. Woolly bear caterpillars can predict the weather. As kids, we grew up thinking that, didn't we? Maybe we even had still thought that as adults. Well, I thought you'd enjoy this. The reality is that they cannot predict what the weather will be, but they can actually tell you what the weather was like the previous year. Yes, that's right. You see, the color of the woolly bears may indicate how long or how cold the previous winter was. All woolly bear caterpillars start out with their body is completely black. And as the year progresses, the black hairs start to turn reddish brown in the middle. The longer the summer, the more brown hairs. The shorter the summer, the fewer brown hairs. So it might be fun to take a look at some of the woolly bear caterpillars this year and see if their predictions are right. And if you see that little list on the left, that's just really interesting, showing all the different caterpillars and how they look, how much brown they have, how much black they have. And just for your own knowledge, woolly bear caterpillars, the adult of a woolly bear caterpillar is a Isabella tiger moth. That's the adult. Now, our last myth might even be the most important myth of all, and that is if it is published, it must be true. The reality is there is a lot of false information out there, but Here's some things to look for if you're looking for more information. Has the information been peer reviewed? Is the information from an academic or a scientific publishing house? Have the experiments been repeated, not just once, but repeated? And will the idea withstand repeated attempts to disprove it? Now, I hope you enjoyed this talk about gardening myths. I am always surprised to learn something that I've been doing for years turns out to be a myth. There are many, many research-based links that talk about gardening myths, and this list of resources here will be sent to you in your email along with the recording of this webinar. So now my co-host will join me and see if she has any gardening questions.
Hi, Jean.
Hi,
I have to
Cheryl.
tell you, I love the story about the woolly bear caterpillar. That was really fun. I really
It's
like that.
fun.
A great deal, Miss, and you got people's brains working on things. So we do have some questions. Um, Coffee grounds. There are a lot of people that go up to Starbucks and get coffee grounds and put them around, and they're just sure that they're keeping the slugs out. So what do you have to say about that?
Um, yeah, I don't know whether that really works, but I don't know if there is research on that
Right,
specifically.
I've never heard any, yeah, I've never heard anything about that.
Right. But it's not going to hurt.
Right. And it's pretty neutral. Just kind of watch that you don't put so much on, as you say, it causes other issues that you don't want to
Exactly.
invite in. So,
Yes.
um, okay, so you mentioned that tomatoes get blossom end rot. It's really a calcium issue. So the question is, should they put bone meal on the soil when they plant tomatoes? What's your best advice?
Okay. Yes, it's a calcium issue, but most of our soils have enough calcium in it. It isn't the calcium in the soil you need to worry about, it's how to get that calcium up into the tomato plant. And the only way that that calcium can get up into the tomato is through water. So that means inconsistent watering is the cause, not the calcium itself. If you forget to water your plants and they go dry for a few days, they're not getting any calcium. And if that tomato is in just the right time of its, growth, it might cause it to have blossom end rot.
That segued perfectly into my next question. You said consistent watering. This one viewer wants to know, what do you mean by consistent watering? How much and how often?
That is a hard question, but I will tell her, especially since she's watching these webinars. Amelia has done some great webinars on
Yes, she
growing
has.
tomato, and she has some really detailed information on there. And in fact, for me to answer that question, I would have to go back and
And
see
look it
exactly
up.
what she said.
Right.
Yeah, to look it up. So I would suggest that your client do that. Look it up.
Yep.
Look Amelia's growing tomatoes,
Yep.
and
Growing
she
tomatoes
has
at 10-minute university handouts. She's got great information there. And I do know the one thing she does say consistently is water that tomato deeply. Don't just give it a little bit of water and then take off. Water it really deeply so it's completely saturated with water and can take up the nutrients it needs.
Yes. I also know she says putting mulch around your tomato plant will also help retain the water
Retain
too.
moisture. Yeah,
Moisture.
retain.
Yeah.
You did mention two tomato plants that were resistant to blossom end rot, Celebrity and Jet
Jet Star. Jet Star
Star.
is a aroma type. It's a
I was gonna say
paste
it's a
tomato.
paste one, isn't it? Right.
Mhm.
So that kind of made me think, if they go to the nursery and if they go to the store and they're picking out tomatoes varieties, how could they figure out which ones are more resistant to blossom end rot?
They would probably need to look up that information first and get a list of ones that are more resistant to blossom end rot. They have that list, then once they get to the store, they could compare it.
Um, is there ever a time that you would top a tree? Would you ever top a tree for any reason? This is
The
a
answer,
loaded
the answer
question.
to the good answer is no, but we see it done all the time, and we
I
see it
know
done,
it's a
yeah, especially under power lines. you
Well, I've
know?
seen arborists come and after a storm where some upper limbs are damaged, they just mow off the top of the tree, which
Yeah.
causes all kinds of problems. So I guess bottom line is there's really no good reason to ever top off a tree. The other
No.
question was, people thought tree roots go down, not out. I thought it was be like a big tap root. So you debunk that as a myth.
Well, trees do have a taproot, but they also have roots that go out. Some tea, and those of you that have had Douglas fir trees that have tipped over, you'll realize that they don't have a very strong taproot. Some have a really strong taproot, some do not. But the ones that go out, the roots that go out, do go out a long way.
And so if you have, I know people that have 3 or 4 fir trees on their property, you have to know that those tree roots are everywhere,
Yeah,
not just at the drip line.
yeah.
Here's a fir needle question. You talked about pine needles, and this woman is wondering, she's got fir needles that she puts around the base of her trees to keep down the shiny geranium. She said it works great to keep down shiny geranium. But now she's thinking, well, 2 to 3 inches around my tree going to cause a problem with my tree roots? That was her concern.
2 to 3 inches of the pine needles itself isn't going to, if you're
And they're
out in the
fir needle.
forest and fir needles, excuse me, but
Uh,
even fir needles out in the forest, the fir needles fall. Yeah, they're going to eventually, just make sure she
great.
doesn't pile it higher that, but they're going to eventually break down.
And you certainly don't want to pile them up high against the trunk of the tree. But
Right, right,
if
not
she,
against the trunk. Right.
right.
Mhm.
And as she's using it as a mulch to keep down shiny geranium, I think that's a great strategy. This for
Ah,
me, I thought it was great. Okay, so you brought up ceanothus and you know the punishment you get for watering your ceanothus.
yes.
She wants to know, she's got one that's a year old and she's wondering when she should stop watering. She's thinking year 3, she should stop giving water to this ceanothus. Do you agree?
That's probably a good idea. You definitely want to water it the first year, and you need to water it a little the second year. If she wants to water it a little bit the third year, that's okay. But after that, it should be just fine on its own. She'll know if she starts looking at it. If it's looking like it needs a little bit of water, it might need a little bit.
Yeah, you do need to have a little talk with your plants. I mean, you can
Yeah.
kind of see when they're flagging. Like if we have the heat dome again, for example, the plant could probably use it. Another question about a drought tolerant plant, manzanitas. And I'm aware that manzanitas are a native plant, but they grow in many different regions here. So what they're wondering is, do manzanitas need watering? Well, yes and no.
Right. The first year or two, definitely. And then after that, probably not, unless you, like you just got done saying, monitor them, see if they're in needing something, need of some water if we have too long of a dry, hot summer.
And it's probably very wise to consider what variety of manzanita you have. If you have a coastal
Mhm.
variety of manzanita, consider the soils in which it grows and the kinds of climate that surrounds them and try to provide them with what they're used to.
Good. That's good that you said that because I'm not familiar very much with the manzanita, and I know that you are. Thank you for saying
Yeah,
that.
coastal manzanita is probably going to want a little bit more water than other manzanitas. This one person puts bone meal on her perennial garden every year, adds bone meal every year. Is that a good practice or not?
Probably not. I would suggest that she have a soil test made to find out if her phosphorus level is too high. Um, because
Right.
even if her plants are doing okay, if her phosphorus level is too high, that can cause some other problems. And also, we don't want it to leach into any water system or groundwater. So I would suggest having a soil test, find out how high her phosphorus is.
I would agree. That's really a great answer, Jane. Just find out what's in that soil. You know, we add things because we want to give vigor and balance to our soils, and sometimes we become overzealous. And we did also have one viewer who is struggling with ladybugs getting into their home in the wintertime.
Um,
And I know what you're going to say, but I'd like you to say it. How can she stop that from happening?
yeah, I know. Those some people do have a big problem with the ladybugs. The main thing
Yes.
is try to keep them out, which is hard, but try to make sure you don't have any holes around your windows or your doors. Make sure the seals are there. Make sure you have screens on everything. And if they are inside, vacuum them up. That's about all we can do.
Right.
We could
And it's
vacuum them,
just,
put them back outside, but hope they don't come back in.
they just want to be inside where it's warm, like we do in the wintertime. And so they're
Yeah,
just doing what they do best, which is try to find a nice, warm space in which they can be nice and winter over and then go back out into your yard. Um, this is a kind of a follow-up question to the bone meal one. So we need to be a little bit cautious about overuse of bone meal. But I do know, and this is not one of the myths that you did, but putting a handful of bone meal in the hole when you put your bulbs in each year is great for the bulbs. It gives them strength and vigor. So what do you think?
then again, I would check to see if I have enough already in my soil. Overdoing it isn't going to help. So if there's
Right.
enough there, there's no reason to buy it, no reason to put it in.
And I was so happy that you said that you didn't have to leave the daffodil greens up. It looks like a dog's breakfast out there because you've got all this, you don't have the flowers anymore, and you have all this greenery that's just flopping around. And braiding them is not my thing.
I Me
Definitely
neither.
not. Yeah, although I have to say somebody did a magnificent job of braiding those.
That was
Um,
pretty, wasn't it?
it was very pretty. Um, so here's a question. This same bulb person just asked another question, so I'm going to read it. She has bulbs everywhere, and $55 per area is a bit steep. I've added a little bone meal every few years, assuming that they're using it in that time based on the amount I apply. I think our answer is still the same to her. She maybe needs her soil tested. Maybe she does not even need to add any bone meal when she plants her bulbs.
Exactly.
That
She might find out, yeah, that they're doing fine without it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and save herself some money because it does get gardening can become expensive if it's your favorite hobby. There are
Yeah.
worse compulsions, right? Jane, that was a wonderful presentation, and I am always amazed at how pervasive some of these myths are, that they just keep getting handed down, and nobody ever examines the truth. So you straightened us out about a lot of myths that we needed straightening out about. And that ends our session for today. Everybody, we have a guest speaker next week. Amy Campion is going to talk about boosting biodiversity in your garden.
Yes.
And tune in. We hope we see all
Yes.
of you there. It'll be our last webinar of the year. Hard to believe the time has ended. Thanks
Yes.
so
Time to
much,
get
Jane.
outside.
Yeah, go
Thank
outside
you,
and
Cheryl.
play.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.